One Piece episode 1147. St. Marcus Mars finally arrived at the massive neural network known as Punk Records, the greatest mind in the world. Vegapunk's transmission was still rolling, and the doctor casually remarked that although his coffee was still too hot to sip, everyone should now have had enough time to get ready for his big reveal. Shaka informed him there were only 30 seconds left before the broadcast went live. Pythagoras, on the other hand, was starting to panic a little. The idea that the entire world would soon be watching made him uneasy. Though honestly, the world had already been watching these guys fumble around with coffee for the past few minutes. Mars glanced upward, astonished by what stood before him, something that seemed to endure even beyond Vegapunk's death. Could this be the doctor's real essence? And then it appeared in full. Punk Records, a breathtaking sight on a dome within a dome resembling the crown of Vegapunk's very own head. Mars wondered what the concept of death would even mean for an existence like this. Was Stella's consciousness part of it too? Without a doubt, this had to be one of the most unbelievable devil fruit powers ever seen. Through the transponder snail, Stella's voice reached Pythagoras, confirming that their recording would eventually reach the world, just as it was doing now. Over the Denden Mushi, Vegapunk confessed that although he was proud of their creation, the truth he was about to reveal weighed heavily on him. St. Mars then raised his boot threateningly above the tiny snail, because apparently things weren't despicable enough already. Who hurts a poor Denden Mushi? From there, the scene shifted to Syrup Village, the East Blue hometown of none other than God Usopp. The former Usopp pirates groaned when they discovered Kaya didn't own a video transponder snail, which, ironically, she was the one person in town who might have. Mary asked if the boys even knew how big one was, explaining that they were larger than most house pets, before leaving to brew some tea. Kaya, looking much healthier than she once did, said that Dr. Vegapunk was also a legend in medicine, something she must have learned while struggling with illness in her youth. Beeman pretended he already knew that, though Ningen immediately called him out for bluffing. Meanwhile, Tamanegi urged everyone to pay attention. This was a global event after all. At Marine headquarters, officers were also getting ready for the full broadcast to begin. Across the seas at Twin Cape, Crocus and Laboon listened in through a normal transponder snail. Then, over in Baltimore, Vegapunk's birthplace, a young boy asked if the great scientist truly came from their island. His grandfather confirmed it proudly, calling Vegapunk their island's greatest achievement. The kid nervously mentioned that Vegapunk might have been the cause of Baltimore's disaster, but the old man corrected him. That was actually Frankie's fault. He pressed the wrong button in the lab thinking it was for pirates and triggered a self-destruct instead. The old-timer also recalled hearing that Frankie later turned himself into a ship. It had been so many years he couldn't even remember the last time he saw Vegapunk's face. Next, the camera took us to the Birdie Kingdom, the South Blue Island where Chopper had spent his time during the time skip. One of the locals guessed the announcement was connected to that place. Another, named John Bob, recognized Vegapunk as the monarch of modern science, the genius responsible for so many of the world's most advanced weapons. Meanwhile, on Pirate Island, Hachinosu, chaos continued as usual. Even as the doctor's world-shaking broadcast was beginning, pirates were still busy settling grudges. Vegapunk's voice echoed across the world, holding everyone's attention. Back on Egghead Island, just before Mars could crush the snail under his boot, its outer shell cracked, and the shocking truth was revealed. It wasn't hiding anyone. It was just a decoy snail. The broadcast was safe. Furious, St. Mars tore himself away from Punk Records, transforming into his massive Itza-made form while swearing Vegapunk's name in anger. Then Vegapunk's message began in earnest. He greeted the audience warmly. Shaka reminded him he'd already introduced himself, but the old man decided to do it again now that the whole world was tuned in. With the pleasantries finished, it was finally time to begin. Among the Long-Arm tribe, people leaned in curiously. Elsewhere, a small boy peeked from a tent asking what was happening, only for a woman to tell him an important man was about to make an announcement and that he should go back to sleep. Mars grew anxious as his fellow elders questioned what he was doing since the broadcast hadn't been stopped yet. Embarrassed, he apologized, then cursed Vegapunk again. The doctor had outsmarted them completely. His preparations were flawless. There was no way to cut the feed. Mars admitted they had no idea how much the scientist actually knew or what he was going to expose. But he reminded them of what York had said, that Stella intended to carry forward the legacy of O'Hara's scholars. The room fell silent as the elders realized the gravity of that statement. This wouldn't be a repeat of Professor Clover's final speech. This would be the continuation. Vegapunk was about to finish what Ohara had begun. Meanwhile, the real Vegapunk's unconscious body was still slung over Sanji's shoulder. Sprinting through the burning wreckage, Sanji wondered if the doctor could somehow hear the desperate cries of a girl nearby, and instantly knew it was Bonnie. As the group came into sight, Sanji noticed one of the elders raising his blade above them. The elder declared that they wouldn't allow Bonnie to wield their power. Frankie jumped forward to shield her, shouting for Bonnie to stay back. But before he could strike, Sanji soared in, ready to take the stage himself. Using the elder's black blade as leverage, he kicked the beast square in the jaw, drawing blood. Sanji really was on fire, literally and figuratively. Sanji didn't care if the guy he was fighting was ancient or divine. This was still a battle between pirates, and he was ready to throw hands. But before he could say another word, the elder's skull suddenly burst into flames. His arms stretched out like he was T-posing, and from his body, the fiery skeletal head of a massive horse emerged, chomping down on Sanji until bones audibly cracked. This was one of the strangest uses of a Zoan-type ability we've ever seen, more like a deliberate mutation, something reminiscent of the artificial smile user's malfunctions. Thankfully, Mr. Four managed to toss Stella's body out of harm's way just in time. Bonnie screamed Sanji's name in fear, terrified that he'd been fatally wounded. Just then, a nearby giant noticed the chaos and began lumbering toward them. Over the airwaves, Vegapunk's voice continued to echo through the world as he confessed to having committed two great sins. Oimo and Kashi lunged forward, restraining Nujuro long enough for Sanji to break free. Atlas quickly swooped in to catch her creator before he could fall. Meanwhile, Bonnie called forth the distorted power of her future Deltarune ability. Several Marines looked on in shock as she leapt skyward, her body swelling to titanic proportions. Wielding the might of a giant's future, she prepared to crush the elder beneath her heel. Vegapunk's tone grew heavier as he told everyone that he expected to be killed soon for what he'd done. The message they were all hearing, he explained, had been pre-programmed to broadcast the instant his heart stopped beating. Across Sabaody, the crowd cried out in disbelief, realizing that this could only mean the brilliant scientist was already gone. Duval, Sanji's infamous lookalike, was dumbfounded. Only that morning, the papers claimed Vegapunk was being held captive by the Straw Hats. Even Vegapunk's rivals were shaken. Caesar clenched his fists, tears forming as he refused to believe Stella was dead, especially after he and Judge had just joined forces to surpass him. It felt almost like Endeavor trying to live up to All Might's legacy. Meanwhile, Morgans wasn't thrilled either. The worldwide Denden Mushi broadcast threatened his grip on breaking the news first, something his newspaper empire thrived on. Before continuing, Stella wanted to make one thing crystal clear. He begged everyone not to see his killers as villains, no matter who they might appear to be. He wasn't here to argue about good or evil. His goal wasn't moral judgment, it was revelation. At the same time, on the Labo Stratum, the Straw Hats were dealing with the sudden arrival of Saint Saturn himself. His voice dripped with venom whenever he spoke the doctor's name. Vegapunk humbly admitted he was in no position to judge anyone, that he lacked the authority and even the understanding to do so. Depending on how people interpreted it, his words could easily be taken as criticism of either the world government or the Straw Hats. When he said him, it might even have been a veiled reference to Imu, or in another light, Luffy, depending on where the story leads. But for Saturn, the implication alone was enough to set him off in fury. Since Vegapunk's message avoided moral stances entirely, things like the empty throne or symbolic justice might not even apply here, meaning all our assumptions could change drastically. Saturn, clearly enraged, lunged forward. He ordered the Straw Hats to stand aside, claiming he didn't have time to deal with insignificant pests. But Robin froze as soon as she heard his voice. It was the same voice she'd heard years ago at Ohara. Recognizing her instantly, Saturn sneered that she was the child the foolish Sakazuki had failed to eliminate. The realization hit Robin hard. She was face to face with one of the five elders. Nami, confused by his words, quickly realized what was happening just as one of the spider-like limbs whipped toward them. "Protect Robin!" she shouted desperately. Even Zeus perked up at her command. The crew sprang into action, shielding Robin from Saturn's monstrous onslaught. I've got to admit, I love moments like these. Seeing characters like Nami and Robin, who aren't powerhouses in comparison, holding their ground against such overwhelming odds, it's what makes One Piece special. And the way Nami wields Zeus here, absolutely perfect. For me, This was easily the highlight of the entire chapter. But the real bombshell was still to come. Vegapunk warned that what he was about to reveal would shake the world. Something so unbelievable that many would call him insane. Mars was trembling with a mix of fear and rage. His Itsu-made form couldn't detect any clear telepathic signals. There were simply too many life forms on the island to isolate one. A small hint into how his species' sensory abilities work. Meanwhile, York was frantically searching for where Stella might have hidden the broadcasting snail. She feared that if the feed kept running, her dream of becoming a celestial dragon would crumble. Interestingly, York seemed completely unaware that a recording even existed, meaning if she didn't know, the elders couldn't have known either. Whatever Vegapunk was about to say was serious enough to endanger her secret deal with the Gorosei, despite her promises about the Mother Flame. Oda was clearly building up to something world-shaking. Vegapunk stated that he bore the duty to reveal a truth that affected all life, something the entire world needed to know. The Gorosei, still communicating through telepathy, debated their next move. Mars suggested destroying the power plant to cut the signal, but Saturn immediately shut that idea down. They'd already lost too much: Marines, an admiral, 9 vice admirals, warships, equipment, seraphim, and even 3 generations of pacifista units. On top of all that, destroying it would also mean losing access to the Mother Flame, something their master Emu desired above all. And with that, Vegapunk got to the heart of his broadcast. The world, he declared, is going to sink beneath the sea. Marines across the island froze in disbelief. The Marines stationed at Navy headquarters were in shock after hearing Dr. Vegapunk's world-shattering revelation. The idea that the very planet they lived on could one day sink beneath the sea. Many questioned whether the old scientist even understood the weight of what he was saying. By the way, Oda slipped in some hilarious character designs here. That bulky officer standing beside Rear Admiral Hina looks suspiciously like a burger man. Meanwhile, Fleet Admiral Akenu stayed silent, puffing on his cigar with his usual grim composure. Elsewhere in the infamous Mocktown, laughter echoed through the streets as the locals mocked the world's smartest fool. To them, Vegapunk's claim was nothing more than a dying man's crazy ramblings. The notion that the entire world could sink under the ocean was pure nonsense. Even in Water 7, a city built on water, the citizens found it hard to imagine such a fate befalling the rest of the world. Polly's face carried deep concern, with Lulu standing silently behind him. But then Oda gave us an unexpected treat, a quick cut to Impel Down where none other than Don Quixote do Flamingo made his grand return. Joker laughed hysterically in his cell, reminding Magellan that even though he's no longer the chief warden, it's still his duty to manage the prisoners. A few guards wondered aloud what Magellan would do if the whole prison ended up underwater. The vice warden had to admit Doflamingo actually had a point. Rising sea levels were already becoming a problem. Just a single meter had caused trouble in several blocks. Magellan could only imagine how catastrophic a global flood would be. The heavenly Yaksha laughed again, noting that if sea levels rose by even 5 meters, most cities would be wiped out. Maybe it was time for them to head somewhere high. After all, he could always find his way back to the clouds. Perhaps a hint that he still knows something about Sky Islands? Deep below the surface in the Ryugu Kingdom, Princess Shirahoshi nervously called out to her father, asking what he thought about the broadcast. Even King Neptune struggled to believe it. And honestly, it would have been hilarious if we also got to see Old Man Hody Jones's reaction to all this. You can just picture him yelling, "Aw, fishmen, rise up." Back on Egghead Island, the Marines surrounding the island listened in disbelief. But since the words were coming from the greatest scientific mind in the world, it wasn't easy to dismiss them as lies. Whether true or not, Vegapunk's warning would no doubt send shockwaves through every corner of the planet. Vice Admiral Hound called the doctor a lunatic, claiming his words were nonsense. But the 5 elders were anything but calm. Panic gripped them. They shifted from merely trying to destroy the broadcast snail to issuing an order to annihilate every life form Mars could sense. Consequences be damned. And it looks like God Usopp might have actually landed a hit right on Saturn's face. Meanwhile, York, the greedy Vegapunk clone, was sprinting around the Labostratum, furious that her creator's words were still being broadcast. On screen, the recorded Vegapunk asked the world to bear with him for a moment as he made a bold prediction. Based on his collected sensory data, he warned that just days after the recording, the entire planet would experience a massive earthquake. In Alabasta, the people froze in shock. Over on Whole Cake Island, Smoothie realized Vegapunk was describing the earthquake that struck earlier that very day, and this despite the fact that the man was already believed to be dead when the message was recorded. Vegapunk explained that following the quake, global sea levels would rise by 1 meter, enough to submerge countless islands and beaches. His words shook people across the world who were still struggling to recover from the earlier disaster. In Hachinosu, even Aokiji listened silently, his face grave. Vegapunk continued saying that if his predictions turned out to be false, people should simply disregard them. But if they came true, which they did, then they needed to listen carefully to what else he had to say. As the Straw Hats continued their desperate battle against the Gorosei, Vegapunk revealed that the earthquake he predicted might not have been a natural event at all. The crew did their best to withstand Saturn's relentless attacks. Even Lilith jumped in with a surprisingly cool pose, though poor Chopper clearly wasn't having a good day. Saturn, enraged by Vegapunk's words, screamed for the broadcast to be stopped immediately. Vegapunk, meanwhile, admitted that his lifelong wish for peace and prosperity might have been his greatest sin. Robin used her powers to catch her falling friends in a net made of blooming hands, but Saturn used Chopper as a launchpad and ignored everyone else chasing his true target. And with that, Vegapunk confessed that his dream of world peace had led him straight into the act he now called his first great sin. Saturn turned to Mars, demanding a report on the power station situation. Mars responded that he was already handling it, the spider-like monster form of his body moving swiftly toward the site. He assured Saturn that he would protect everything valuable inside that chamber. Then, just like a monstrous version of the Kool-Aid Man, Saturn tore straight through a wall, debris scattering everywhere. Meanwhile, Dr. Vegapunk's recorded voice echoed, speaking passionately about his wish to create a limitless energy source, something that could push humanity into a brighter, more advanced future. If energy scarcity could be eliminated, he believed he could bring innovations like climate regulation and mass food production to the entire world, not just Egghead Island. As Saturn drew closer, he had to shield his eyes from a blinding light, and that's when we finally saw it, the Mother Flame. Vegapunk compared himself to Icarus, saying that in his pursuit of the sun, he had flown too close, paying the price for his ambition. In fury, Saint Saturn shifted back into his humanoid form, smashing everything in sight with his staff. The other elders shared his wrath. They decided to annihilate every living being on the island without hesitation. At the same time, the Mother Flame pulsed and expanded with intense energy. Elsewhere, the Marines continued their hopeless fight against the massive ancient robot roaming Egghead. No weapon they fired left even a scratch on it. Back in the chaos, Luffy reignited his Gear 5 form, electricity crackling around him. Nearby, the two giant warriors Dory and Brody grimaced at the raging fires caused by Saint Topman's attacks. Vegapunk continued his speech, explaining that to truly understand where the world is headed, humanity must first face the truths buried in the past. Specifically, the mysterious stretch of history arid between 900 and 800 years ago, the time most know only as the blank century. And yes, even Imu was watching this broadcast closely. In Mary Joyce, the celestial dragons were seething, enraged that the Marines had failed to cut off the feed. Vegapunk boldly called this erased period by its true name, the Void Century. He stated that while nearly all records had been destroyed or hidden, there was still one key that allowed fragments of the past to be rediscovered. That statement drove the Celestials mad. Some even wanted to punish Vegapunk personally for speaking such forbidden words. Saint Shalria frowned, unable to even grasp what the scientist was talking about. Could it be that even the world nobles themselves don't know what the Void Century truly is? Somewhere in a quiet forest, a giant sat by himself, listening. It was Saul. As Vegapunk mentioned the Ponoglyphs, Saul smiled and leaned back. These mysterious stones scattered around the world contained inscriptions that, when decoded, reveal glimpses of that lost era. After all, the man marked by flames is rumored to possess one of the most important of these stones. In Orangetown, a young girl asked Boodle if it was true that 20 kings had once joined together to form the world we know today. She wondered if Vegapunk was talking about that same story. The mayor wasn't sure, but he thought maybe Choo Choo might have an opinion. Even the Kuja tribe were tuned in, listening closely. Vegapunk explained that deciphering ponoglyphs is one of the greatest taboos under world government law, but despite that, he confessed to committing his second great sin, defying the government and studying that forbidden era. On Egghead, Brook called out to Zoro and Jinbei while the crew caught their breath amidst the chaos. Vegapunk continued, saying that much of his knowledge came from ancient research documents he had inherited, writings left behind by the archaeologists of Ohara, though he never mentioned their name outright. Thanks to those records, he was able to decipher many of the poneglyphs himself. He pushed this research to its absolute limits, never regretting it, because to him, history is just another story waiting to be told. Suddenly, the ground beneath the straw hats started trembling. Nami looked up and noticed the clouds above were stretching unnaturally. Brook reminded Usopp that this might be what Edison had been referring to earlier. Usopp nodded. Now that the cloud's edges had shifted, their ship could use the momentum to dive straight into the sea. Edison, though heavily damaged, still hoped that the crew would make it out safely and escape the government's pursuit. Maybe, just maybe, the broadcast snail was being relayed through the Thousand Sunny itself. Vegapunk then admitted humbly that he only knew fragments of the century-long tale, and he didn't want to mislead the world with personal theories. From this point onward, he said, everything he would share was pure fact, not speculation. Elsewhere, Brogy shouted at Luffy to stop pushing himself, but the Straw Hat captain refused to quit. Vegapunk's voice continued narrating, introducing the central figure of this forgotten story. Luffy clenched his burning fist again, ready to attack the massive boar-like monster before him, confident that this next blow would work. Vegapunk revealed that long ago, around 900 years in the past, there was a man born in a magnificent and technologically advanced kingdom. This man, like the legendary sun god Nika from the Tales of Elbaf, had a body that could stretch and bend in impossible ways. His name was Joy Boy. Luffy's punch landed, his hands seared by the heat, and his giant allies burst into laughter despite the danger surrounding them. That laughter, that joy in the face of battle, was the very essence of what Nika's power symbolized. And perhaps, through these battles, Luffy was slowly learning how to adapt to the Elder's godly strength. Looking up toward the heavens, Vegapunk's voice grew wistful. He revealed that Joy Boy wasn't just a hero. He was the first man ever to set sail, the original adventurer of the seas, the very first pirate.